Imagine waking up one morning. All your savings, enough yesterday to buy a house, can't even buy a loaf of bread today. Your paycheck loses its value before it even reaches your account. People are carrying cash not in their pockets, but in wheelbarrows. This is not a dystopian movie scene. This is real, and it has happened far more times than you think. We see money as something reliable, something unshakable, but history tells us something completely different. And the worst hyperinflations in history didn't just wipe out bank accounts. They brought down governments, families, and empires. They swept through societies like financial wildfires, laying bare just how fragile our systems truly are. You are about to see how 5 countries, 5 real economies, watched their currencies burn, and what it cost them. As you listen, keep this in mind. Inflation doesn't always begin with noise. It seeps in silently. It whispers. And by the time most people notice, it is already too late to run. Germany, 1923, the Weimar Republic. Right after World War I, Germany was being crushed under an enormous debt burden. The Treaty of Versailles had imposed 132 billion gold marks in reparations on the country, a figure nearly impossible to repay for generations. What did the German government do? It printed money, a lot of it. At first it seemed manageable. Then prices doubled, tripled, then reached the breaking point. In November 1923, a loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. People burned banknotes to stay warm, children played with bricks of currency, middle-class families watched everything they had saved over years evaporate within weeks. But the real destruction wasn't financial, it was trust. When a society's faith in its money runs out, everything collapses. Commerce, contracts, savings, salaries, all of it falls apart. This collapse didn't just hit the economy, it also created the desperation and chaos that gave extremists their opening. Just 10 years later, Adolf Hitler came to power, and economic trauma was part of the foundation he built on. Zimbabwe, early 2000s. When President Robert Mugabe's government faced sanctions and economic isolation, it launched massive land seizures that devastated agricultural production and the response the printing press once again. History began repeating itself almost immediately. By 2008, Zimbabwe's inflation rate was estimated at 79.6 billion%. Prices doubled every 24 hours. The government kept adding zeros to banknotes minus 10 million, 100 billion, $100 trillion bills. Eventually it gave up entirely, switching to foreign currencies like the US dollar and South African rand. What was the cost? Hyperinflation wiped out pensions, collapsed industries, and created an entire generation of economic refugees. In the end, only real wealth survived: land, skills, tangible assets. Paper meant nothing. Hungary, 1946. This is known as the worst hyperinflation in recorded history. After World War II, Hungary had been economically shattered. The government introduced a currency called the peng and began printing it at an unimaginable rate to cover war debts and reconstruction costs. At its peak, prices were doubling every 15 hours. The inflation rate reached 41.9 quadrillion%, that is a 4, followed by 16 zeros. The currency became so worthless that the government issued new banknotes just to keep up. First the mil peng, worth 1 million pungs, then the b peng, worth 1 billion, but it still wasn't enough. Eventually they abandoned the currency entirely and started from scratch. Hungary's middle class had been annihilated. Savings accounts went to zero. The government lost whatever legitimacy it had left. Hyperinflation didn't just reset the economy, it erased the past. Venezuela from the 2010s to today. Oil-rich, resource-rich, yet politically broken. Years of corruption, price controls, nationalizations, and reckless monetary policy turned one of Latin America's wealthiest countries into a cautionary tale. The government printed money to cover deficits, subsidize failing programs, and hold on to power. And inflation picked up speed. In 2018, Venezuela's inflation rates surpassed 1 million%. Imagine receiving your paycheck and having to spend it that same day because by tomorrow it will have lost half its value. Supermarkets emptied. Barter came back. Doctors and engineers left the country to work as delivery drivers abroad. Just as in Zimbabwe, those with tangible assets or access to dollars survived. Those without didn't. Yugoslavia, 1990s. After the violent disintegration of the country and the collapse of the Soviet bloc, Yugoslavia's economy collapsed under the weight of war, sanctions, and mismanagement. In 1993, inflation reached 313 million% per month. Prices doubled every 1.4 days. The government issued new currencies again and again, each time wiping out old savings. Citizens turned to German marks and US dollars just to survive. The official currency became a joke useful only for lighting cigarettes or wallpapering abandoned shops. And underneath it all, the same pattern kept repeating. A government faces a crisis, it prints money. Trust disappears. The currency collapses. Society falls apart. Over and over again. Different countries, different decades. The same mistake. You might be thinking, these are things of the past. We are smarter now. We have learned our lesson. But have we really? Today, global debt levels are at record highs. The United States alone has a national debt of over $34 trillion, and it keeps growing. Central banks around the world have spent the last decade printing trillions of dollars to keep economies afloat, suppress interest rates, and stimulate markets. And for a while it seemed to work. Inflation stayed low, growth continued, the system held, until it didn't. In 2021 and 2022, something changed. After years of calm, prices began rising rapidly. Supply chain shocks, the war in Ukraine, rising energy prices, and yes, freshly printed trillions finally came face to face with reality. Central banks went from printing to panicking. Interest rates were raised aggressively. Markets wobbled. And ordinary people, the ones who never benefited from the era of cheap money, began to feel the squeeze. Rents surged. Food prices rose. Wages didn't keep up. And for the first time in decades, people began asking hard questions again. What is money? Who controls it? What happens when trust breaks? We are not at hyperinflation levels yet. But the warning signs are there, not just in prices, but in mindset. In the belief that printing money can solve structural problems. In the illusion that we can borrow forever without consequences. In the assumption that central banks will always save us. These are dangerous assumptions. The very same ones made in Weimar Germany, in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela. The difference now is scaled because the entire global economy has never been so tightly interconnected, so dependent on debt, and so reliant on central bank intervention. If trust breaks now, it won't be contained to a single country, it could be systemic. And this concerns you may not control the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank, but you can control your own exposure, your savings, your habits, your mindset. So what can you truly learn from the 5 worst hyperinflations in history? First, real wealth is not a piece of paper. It is purchasing power. It is land, skills, tangible assets, useful relationships, and inner resilience. In every one of these countries, printed wealth vanished. But those who had tangible assets, or could create value outside the financial system, endured. Second, trust is everything. Currencies don't collapse because the ink runs out. They collapse because belief runs out. When people stop believing that the money in their hand has value, the game is over. And that belief can fade far faster than most people can imagine. Third, inflation punishes the unprepared. It moves fast. It compounds. And it hits those living paycheck to paycheck the hardest. Governments may inflate their debt away, but you cannot inflate your grocery bill down. That is why financial education is not just about growing wealth. It is about protecting it. So what does protection look like today? It looks like understanding the system instead of blindly trusting it. It looks like reducing unnecessary debt. It looks like diversifying your assets, not just across stocks, but across systems. Maybe that means holding some hard assets. Maybe it means learning a skill that holds its value no matter what happens in the markets. Maybe it means building a life that costs less to sustain. Most of all, it means remembering that inflation is a hidden tax, a slow, silent erosion of your financial freedom, unless you know how to guard against it. The 5 worst hyperinflations in history were not random events. They were the product of bad policy, war, denial, arrogance, and the seductive lie that money can be created without consequence. But now you know better. You have seen the pattern. And the next time someone says that could never happen here, you will know exactly how to respond. History does not repeat itself, but if you do not understand it, it will crush you all the same. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History has the answers. I will show you where to look.